Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah, and welcome to another episode of A Piece of Cake. We apologize for the 2-week absence, but a lot was going on. But we're here, we're back, and there is my brother over there, Brother Anthony Abdurraheem Green. Greet everyone, dear sir.
And yes, assalamu alaikum everyone. And obviously there's Abdul Haqq. I don't think we need to introduce, bro. Like the people who are watching us know who we are. I think we've done that. But
no, it's just nice. It's nice to hear the ring to your name and whatever.
All right, bro. No. So what are we talking about today, bro?
Today it's going to be a very serious focus, I think, very important. And we're in Black History Month, and I want to speak about that and the tokenism of that to an extent. However,
yeah, exactly. So let's just get right in there, bro. What is this Black History Month, bro? What is this pandering to minorities, bro? And like, see where it's gone, right? You start with Black history, and you end up with LGBTQ plus 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Well,
I want to be a cat and I want to be a bunny. So it all started there, and it's ended up, like, if Tommy wants to be a cat today, he can be a cat.
I won't put them together in that way. I hear what you're saying.
People have though.
No, you have.
That's what they're doing, isn't it?
Yeah, the usual hijacking. We've seen this from the civil rights movements of the 50s and 60s. But I think that with Black History Month, I've got mixed feelings about that, in the sense that why do we need to designate a month to Black history? I do understand it, because I think that when you look at what's happening in the world today, yesterday, there's always an overlooking or a diminishing, a dilution of Black causes, always, and they're always tokenized. So I can understand it. It started in America. They hold it in February. Canada does likewise. The UK does it in the 80s. I think it's ironic that Black History Month coincides with the last day of October, which is Halloween, and you and I know the purpose and origins of Halloween.
It's probably not ironic at all, bro. Probably all on purpose.
I wrote recently about it, and I'm thinking they should put those dates together to see the horrors that were inflicted upon Black people. Yeah. My thought is, I think that's something that they should consider if they want to do something very significant in this particular month. But I feel now, not only about Black history, consigning it to slavery, there are those who are looking prior to slavery, what preceded slavery, because amongst the African nations, amongst the Latin Americans and the brown peoples of the world, there is a great history from which European history emerged, and as you well know, and the hegemony that is there amongst Europeans and imperialism emanated from a lot of what they stole, pillaged from brown peoples. But it's not to hold the month in that respect. I think we should also be looking at Black future. And I wrote an article, Black Future Advancing Initiatives, because I think it's now high time that momentum is increased, whereby Black excellence has to move to the stage where it's competing with whiteness, with white imperialist institutions and standards, and meeting them and excelling beyond them, as was once the norm. So when I'm talking about that, Abdurraheem, I just want to go very quickly on that, because I want to look at, for example, let's talk about apartheid and how that is viewed today and how it was viewed yesterday. You were probably supportive of fighting against apartheid in South Africa. I was supportive of that. Many from different ethnicities and backgrounds were. And when we look at, we all laud Nelson Mandela, we all laud ANC and the achievements that they made, not talking about so much now, but in their struggle against what was oppression, which was clear oppression. So let's look at standards with regards to apartheid. There are still apartheid states and regimes today, but there's a different emphasis and focus as it relates to whether it's considered apartheid in one instance.
Well, can you start by defining apartheid? What is apartheid exactly, bro?
Apartheid is, I'm using my words now, is the subjugation and classing citizens as second class, while a particular ethnicity or race, if you want to use that term, are in dominance in society, and the laws and legislation show preference to that minority or to the dominant ethnicity, whereas there are secondary laws that confine others, whoever the others are, to second-class lifestyle, citizenship, oppression, denigration, all of that, and the second class serve that first class.
I see. So, well, I mean, it's not like even an issue that there's going to be much debate about the fact that that's just a bad thing. That's not a good thing to have. So that's good. So obviously South Africa was but they were self-professed apartheid state. They didn't even hide it. They didn't even deny it, right? They were full on, in your face, committed to apartheid. I guess, are they the ones who even came up with this terminology? Did they? Well, I mean, I don't remember them ever being even embarrassed about them calling themselves and instituting this as a policy. So
others supported them. Others, Margaret Thatcher supported South Africa. King Charles, even with these visits down there was tacit approval. Yes, you're right. They were unashamedly apartheid and we saw, blacks drinking in particular confined areas, whites having privilege on particular beaches and the like. And just because you don't call yourselves apartheid, that doesn't mean you're not an apartheid state. There are disputes.
Of course, I can understand that. I'm just mentioning the point that in South Africa, the whites were very clear about it and very, very explicit. They didn't even bother trying to cover it up with any sort of decorations or sort of padding or anything. They were quite in your face about it.
And they called anyone who opposed them terrorists. Nelson Mandela was once considered a terrorist because of his resistance and resilience to the apartheid regime. So again, parallels that echo today in what we're seeing in Palestine. Let's call it to say in black and white. We know what's happening today. I don't think we can get into it'd be too much of a discussion. I think that will go too deep to go into where we are with that. But I think it's worth mentioning, it's worth acknowledging that apartheid is alive and kicking today in a different part of the world, but it's being denied as such, and yet you've got official bodies saying yes, there is apartheid taking place.
Well, I mean, you recently had a former Mossad chief coming out and saying clearly that Israel, there was a Mossad chief, former chief of Mossad, I think it was the former chief of Mossad or something else, who said, Israel is an apartheid state. I mean, they've relatively recently, passed very clear laws that basically say Israel is a Jewish state, and that is with the express purpose of making it legislatively impossible for Palestinians to get power. And so I mean, this decimates the claim that this constant thing we've kept hearing, Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, which is obviously clearly ridiculous,
right?
In the light of in the light of laws that have been relatively recently passed, making it clear that it always has to stay and must stay a dominantly Jewish controlled state. So I mean, the life of Palestinians, in Israel and indeed in Palestine, in the West Bank and in Gaza, I mean, especially, it's pretty horrific. You
visited there, didn't you?
I did, but it really definitely wasn't as bad then as it is now. You didn't have the wall that that's been built relatively recently. You didn't have these segregated roads where only Israelis could drive. I mean, you did probably have compounds and stuff like that, but it certainly wasn't on the level that it is today. It's just present modern day, like the way it is today is a completely different ball game. But it was pretty horrific. I mean, when I visited, I visited Palestine. I don't even remember the dates. Must have been what, 1986 or something like that, 89 maybe. I'm sure I can find the exact. I'm terrible with dates, but it was just after the first Intifada, and I think the thing that sparked our visit. So Yusuf Islam was the one who initiated it, and there was a bunch of people there. There was Yusuf Islam, Ibrahim Hewitt, the two prominent guys that I remember. Yusuf, I don't even know what's happened to him. Ibrahim is still doing his stuff, mashallah. Another brother, Sahib Mustaqim Blah, I don't remember what's happened to him. There was a bunch of anyway, mostly British Muslims, and some have passed away since then. But anyway, it was I think a 2-week. We went around bits of Palestine and bits of Israel, and we went to Gaza. Went to the West Bank. We're in Al-Quds, prayed in Masjid Al-Aqsa. But the first thing I remember, Abdul, was quite shocking. Is that our first day, our introduction, was that we went to a hospital, and it was shocking. It was like a war zone, and it was a kids' hospital. So this was a hospital that it was just for children, and I still remember seeing this brother who had been run over by an Israeli Jeep, young, 16-year-old, 15-year-old kid, run over by an Israeli Jeep. And there was stitches in his body literally from his rib cage all the way down to his abdomen and across the bottom of his groin, like a huge L shape. And it was just stitches, huge. Like it was something like from Frankenstein or something. And then there were kids who had been gassed, and they didn't have the antidote for the gases because it was basically some chemical composition that these gas canisters came from the USA. They didn't know what was in them. They didn't have an antidote for it. So some of the kids were really suffering. Some died from this. And then I think one of the most horrific things was the fact that they were shot with like they call them dum-dum bullets. They're bullets that explode inside you. They fragment inside you. They're actually illegal under the Geneva Convention. Let's just remember, while everyone's talking about Geneva Conventions, and I'm sure we're going to hear a lot of this type of stuff. Oh, this is against the Geneva Convention. The Israelis never cared about the Geneva Convention. I saw these kids who had been shot by these fragmented bullets, and the doctor was saying that we can take out maybe a small percentage of the largest fragments, but it's impossible to take out every single fragment because there's literally thousands of them, and it would cause such tissue damage they would die from it. He said eventually these will become infected and it will kill them. In 30 years time they will die from these wounds, but it's like long, because those bits of shrapnel, those bits of bullet are inside you, and then they start affecting your system. These are kids. These were, like kids 4 years old, 7 years old, 10 years old. So, I mean, this was years and years ago. This was in the 1980s. This is what we were seeing. So this whole idea that somehow the Israeli army is some ethical, force of, ethical army, it's just nonsense. What we saw was
on your trips. on the trips, how did you feel how did you see the Palestinians living their existence? Tell us a bit about that.
What we saw was a lot of people living in real poverty. I remember this one woman, we visited her house. It was just a mud house, really, and there was a big pool in the middle of one of the rooms, which just had a big pool of water in it. And her husband had been taken by the Israeli police. She had nothing to eat. She had the kids. She had to go out and sell sweets on the street to feed her kids. I don't know, 5, 6 kids. Horrific. I think one of the things that really, probably the thing that had really stuck in my head and had a huge impact on me was we visited the home of a family. Well, it wasn't a home anymore. It had been demolished by the Israeli army. The Israeli army had come and demolished this Palestinian family's home at 2 o'clock in the morning. And the reason was because their son had been accused of having taken part in a demonstration. Like, this is the reason they gave. Can you imagine? I mean, just imagine here, if the British police, whatever, the British army came to your house at, 2 o'clock in the morning and just blew up your home in front of you because, your daughter had been to some protest. Can you imagine? So this is what happened. And then when they started, with that, they started to try and clear up the rubble and, begin to rebuild their home. The Israeli said, "You won't touch it. It's here as a, what do you call it? Like a lesson for everyone else."
Reminder. Yeah. As a reminder.
It's a reminder for everyone else. This is what you get. And but the thing, bro, that was really shocking, but in a really good way, is we visited. They were just living in a tent on like a corner of their land. Yeah, and when you say "Assalamu alaikum, wa alaikum assalam, kayfa halak, alhamdulillah," peace be with you, "Assalamu alaikum," and how are you? All praise is due to Allah. And they're inviting us to sit down and have tea with them. And they didn't look, they were just having a camping trip. In the that was the, what I mean? It's like, imagine we went camping in a field and we were just sitting there cooking up some tea. It's like, "Yeah, the Haqq, how you doing? Yeah, I'm good, man." It was like, and it was that type of, that spirit of. There's so many things, bro. I guess I could talk about my whole trip for the whole podcast. It would take up a lot of whatever, because there were so many things I experienced, so many conversations that we had, so many people that we met who told us their stories, and really, really just I think the main thing was just a very hard, difficult life, very, very hard, difficult life, and living under what was basically a really occupation.
Yeah.
And this thing that your land has been taken over by other people, and there's just almost nothing you can do about it. You can't even protest. You can't even. There's no legal route. There's just nothing you can do, really.
And imagine, Abdurraheem, that's really important. The reason why this personal story that you're sharing is important, because you're showing a normality of ordinary people who are living in subjugation. And reason that I thought I wanted to do this title is because that is what, to a similar extent and in some barbaric forms as well, that Black populations underwent, okay, to the extent of being brutalized and treated as cattle and everything like that. And while that may not be there today, we know that there's this big campaign and push about human trafficking, and we see CNN and everyone, and as they should, really campaigning against it, and that's good. But we see in parallel, juxtaposed beside that, this denial still in some quarters, particularly the British, with regards to reparations, despite we see the banks.
Yeah, that's an interesting
so we see, when it comes again, coming back to it, as you started, I know that you were saying it jokingly, but I know there was a seriousness in that you were saying about now, what about Black History Month? Everyone again has jumped on the bandwagon and pushed blackness and the focus on blackness and Black oppression and the reparations and what's taking place, the inherited trauma. They've pushed that to the side. So you speaking about going on a trip to Palestine, meeting normal, regular individuals who are living in abject poverty, and it's the most densely populated area on earth, okay? The most densely populated area on earth. And you then look at the maps of what they once had to what they have now, and you use the term occupation. Really, you'll see a lot of, I think, when we look at the Irish, when we look at Black populations, when we look at Latin American populations, Asian populations, the reason there's empathy is because they recall a history where they were enduring similar if not worse, because of the circumstances. And what you mentioned about that individual who was suspected, we know collective punishment was a strategy of this, which was introduced by the British before they handed over to the Americans to assist the Israeli state and its development. But I want to read this part. I've written a few times about aspects of Palestine, but and before I go into that, I would say wa alaikum salam rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to all of you who've jumped on. It's really good to see you here, mashallah tabarakallah. But what I want to mention, Abdurraheem, is just to show some of the things that I'm just going to read an excerpt of what I wrote 7 years ago. And I wrote this, the article's The Flying Elephant in the Room. I wrote it in June 2015. A two-state solution continues to be touted by the US and the West as the only alternative for peaceful coexistence between the Jewish and Palestinian populations. It is a proposal that maintains traction even among sections of the Arab world. In contrast, Benjamin Netanyahu and his present government continue to maintain their obstructive stance towards this solution. We would do well to remember that there is an elephant in the room, but unlike Dumbo, the friendly flying character who is fictitious, this one is more ominous and real. Those involved in trying to change the Middle East political landscape by applying ill-conceived policies and practices can no longer ignore the devastation that has been wrought in that region. The double standards implemented across the Middle East have contributed to the heightened security status many of us now face within our societies. And I mentioned Tony Blair at the time. Tony Blair finally resigned as Middle East peace envoy, and hopefully other statesmen holding similar positions of influence will also take their leave. Final sentence. Indeed, they are creators of some of today's monsters. If the hovering elephant and its surrounding issues had been addressed more emphatically and fairly in the past, there would be no beasts to fear. We would then be assured of a more peaceful sleep, as opposed to the living nightmare many of us now have to endure. That was 7 years ago I wrote that, Abdurraheem, and I believe it still applies today. Look at the nightmare that's taking place at the moment. And let's be clear. I want to be really clear in this. We know from the principles of the Sharia and the Deen to attack innocent civilians indiscriminately, destroying buildings, houses, everything like that. We know that's not from the principles of the Deen. So let's put that clear. But at the same time, I want to say, because you'll have those saying, oh, they're not speaking for Palestine. No, we're not speaking against Palestine here. We're speaking for Islam in this instance. But at the same time, while mentioning that, we've got to be really clear. I was having a conversation earlier with a close brother. There's no smoke without fire. There is no smoke without fire. I say that, but I say at the same time, two wrongs don't make a right. Yes, two wrongs will never make a right. So what we're seeing today that's playing out, you're going to see many on particular sides of the fence. I will say clearly, yes, the Palestinian cause is one that we support, though, and we have to differentiate, as we've been doing for years now. We are not anti-Semitic, but being anti-Zionist does not equate to being anti-Semitic, and being pro-Palestinian does not mean pro-Hamas. And I'm saying that from my perspective really clearly, because you'll see that individuals and entities want to obfuscate those demarcations that I've given to then shut down the discussion unless it's pro-Israeli. So my thing is, we've got to be very, very careful on the language that we use, the nuances that we use. And what's got to be at the forefront for us as Muslims is, what does the religion say? So those who may say, oh, this is a good thing, what does the religion say? It doesn't say that. Those who say it's a bad thing and these individuals should be grateful for the lot that they've got, what does the religion say? It doesn't say that either. Nuance is really important at this point. And if we don't know, Abdurraheem, because what I've said there, I won't elaborate upon, because I'm not one of knowledge to know the deep histories, the trajectories and everything like that. If we don't know, don't discuss. And many of us may want to discuss beyond what I've discussed. Why? Because of opinions, self-opinionated ideas and perspectives, and because of this social media edutainment crisis that we find ourselves in as Muslims. Every Tom, Dick and Harry, so to speak, is speaking without knowledge. So I can only speak within that remit that I've spoken. That's the knowledge I have. But we only have to look, and we can draw parallels. Oppression is always clear. Oppression's always clear, and it would always come up to the surface. Hence why Allah says about the Muslim and the non-Muslim making dua if they are oppressed, that He will answer it. He will answer their dua, whether Muslim or non-Muslim.
I'm sure you're more familiar with like South America. The details are very hazy in my mind. I do remember South America, the apartheid regime collapsing. I don't remember the details. I don't remember how it happened. I don't remember. I mean, the ANC was a designated, I guess, terrorist organization, and it's well known that Nelson Mandela was, considered to be a terrorist. Yeah, the irony of it. But how? The ANC was involved in a violent conflict, right?
Right.
There was guerrilla warfare going on with the South African army. But what brought the white apartheid regime to its knees? What was the thing that really finished it? How did it transition from an apartheid state to being a black African nation with whites and people living in it? I think that would be very interesting to see.
Excellent question.
How did that transition happen? Because honestly, the details for me are really hazy, but there must have been something that happened where the position of that apartheid regime was not tenable anymore. And did it end democratically? Like, well, obviously
it did.
It can't have.
Did.
So
it did. Yeah. But the global momentum and political momentum, the groundswell internationally was overwhelming. And I think the dignity.
So was it the boycotting? Was it to do with boycotts and sanctions?
Boycotting, pressure groups. I think Nelson Mandela and those who were with him, who were imprisoned for a horrific amount of time, 27 years, and some of them slightly less than that, and the dignity and grace that they held, and I think the lucidity when they were spoken to about the struggle and how it's not going to be removed. It was generational. I think that also, the realization of the political elite and that those in power at the time realized that this is not going to change. I think it was Botha. I can't remember the first name.
Yeah.
And that's similar to what we saw when the USSR, the Russian Federation, collapsed. The realization of those at the top, that the tide against them became a tsunami. And there was just no way that was going to dissipate in any what shape or form. As Features has just said, as I mentioned, the global pressure, there was a united pressure on the government. Now, is that the same with what we're looking at now today with the apartheid?
No,
it's not. It's not the same. There's the unity's not there. You've got the same statements that we're seeing today that yes, Israel has the right to defend itself, but why isn't there an also synonymous statement about the Palestinians have the right to defend themselves? Those two statements are never hand in hand, and we see where the cancel culture and we see where the pressure is at the moment, that many are afraid to speak in favor of the Palestinians in the sense of the oppression that they've caused. And again, let's be clear, we're not speaking about Hamas. We're talking about the Palestinians, these individuals that you saw, the child that you saw in with the stitches up to the chest and to the side, the woman with the water in the room. These are the people we are speaking about. But that's not what is being heard. And what is being done is those who speak in this way are being targeted. So just today, Abdurraheem, you can see that I've seen on social media, and I haven't been watching, but things have been sent to me. And you've seen those who are opinionated, and some of them have some very good views sometimes. Like, this is not the time to talk about this subject. We must make dua. Yeah, by default, we must be making dua. But why is there a silence in that regard? But we hear others speaking. Go and look at the mainstream media and some of the lies and distortion and the term that's being used. Okay, that's concerning Hamas. But what about the people who have been killed, the 200 odd that have been killed? They're not terrorists. They're not considered terrorists. But we hear that language, that vocabulary, as it points in the direction of the Palestinians, terrorists. Victims, no. What I'm saying is, we should be fearless in pointing to the truth, whichever way it lies. Again,
I think the thing is, you know, if we're going to be fearless about pointing to the truth, yeah, you know, I have some, I could say some pretty controversial things, to be honest, right? And I think, you know, I think one of the things that is a sort of inevitable, and that's just part of the human condition. You could say it's the sunnah of Allah, that the way He's created the reality of the world, is that oppression and tyranny, it will only stay so long. You know, there will always come a time when people are just not going to take it anymore. They're going to rise up, and they, in one way or another, they are going to do whatever it takes to remove that yoke of tyranny and oppression from them. And the way they do it may take many different forms, yeah. And ultimately, I guess it just doesn't matter, because people are just, you know, when you've got nothing to lose, that's it. That's what you're going to do. You're going to do whatever it takes to get yourself. This is very interesting. I think it's a very, you know, interesting thing about the human condition, is that, you know, and it's interesting that that Allah in the Quran, he alludes to this when he says that tyranny is worse than killing. Yeah, and in the sense that it could be alluding to that human condition, that people living under tyranny, they would rather die than live under tyranny.
Right.
And that it gets to a stage where people don't care, because that fundamental need for human freedom, yeah, or degrees of human freedom, is so profound and so deep. I mean, that's a big conversation we can have about what does it mean, freedom? What is it? Maybe justice. Maybe freedom is not the right word, but people need to live and feel that justice is being done, and that they are being treated justly and fairly. And when people are not being treated justly and fairly, and they are treated in an unjust and unfair manner for long enough, they will snap. They just can't bear it. They can't bear being treated unjustly. And I think this is something very important to add to the conversation.
I agree. And
I think I'm just to mention, especially when we talk about resistance, you know, whether it's the apartheid regime in South Africa, whether it's the Palestinians, or, you know, whoever it may be, yeah. Sometimes what I do, and this is probably the thing that's very controversial, I sometimes think about, well, how are the people who are being oppressed, how do they behave themselves? What is their own condition? You know, one of the things I always look at is, for example, yeah, how do people treat their women? Yeah, that's a good indication. A good indication of the condition of a society, yeah, and to see whether they are really tyrants or not. Yeah, because it's ironical, isn't it, that you complain about tyranny, but you yourself are a tyrant.
Right.
You complain about tyranny, but you yourself are a tyrant. I sometimes have this joke with my wife, you know, because my wife is always going on about, you know, she doesn't like vaccine mandates and mask mandates, and they're making us do this and making us do that, and, you know, whatever. I said, but you know what, you yourself, right, the iron grit that she has in the house, I said, you'd make communist China blush. Yeah, it's like, look at you, like, God forbid that you would be in charge of the world, right? Because you'd be the worst tyrant. Yeah. And this is the point being, is I say that jokingly, but behind it is a big point, is a very, very important point. And the very, very important point is that, you know, life is a test. We all have to understand life is a test. Allah will give everyone their time to see how you are going to behave, right? To see how you are going to behave, right? And I saw something today that just gave me a bit of like hope. yeah, and made me feel, because I won't lie, I've been very disappointed in the Muslim Ummah. I've been very disappointed in the Muslims. My
Likewise.
experience with the Muslims is very disappointing. The level of corruption, the level of tyranny, the level of injustice, the level of bad treatment of women, you know, and I would say even misogyny, yeah, and appalling slave labor in Pakistan, like across the world, Bangladesh, the stuff that you will see in the Muslim world. And I'm not even talking about here the shirk and the magic and the kufr and the bid'ah. Just talk about how they treat other human beings, how they treat each other, how they treat animals, right?
Right.
It's shockingly bad, right? So when we have to realize that it's all a test. Yeah, our time will come. But what have we made ourselves ready? Are we people of justice? Are we going to be? And this is one of the things that often you people say is you think that the Jews, yeah, having gone through all the horrors of the Holocaust, yeah, and this has been pointed out by some Holocaust survivors in Israel, right? Is that you would think that having gone through all of that, they would be the furthest people from treating other human beings like that.
Right.
You understand? Like, wait a minute, you went through all of this horror, but then you are going to start treating Palestinians in some sort of similar way to the way that you were treated, right? I'm not saying exactly, but you know, some of that, like even this is some Holocaust survivors pointed this out. I'm not saying it like it's me. This is what they're saying themselves, is that some of the things that is happening to the Palestinians reminded them as Jewish Holocaust survivors of what they went through themselves, right? But that's the test, isn't it? That's the test. This is a test for my brothers and sisters as well, wherever they may be, right? Is that when we're fighting against tyranny and oppression, we, you know, that when the time comes for the switch, and it will come, it's always going to happen. That's just history, the inevitability of history. What have we got to show? What are we going to do? How are we going? What etiquettes, what manners, what sense of justice are we going to display? I think by and large, historically, mostly, not all the time, the Muslim Ummah has stepped up to the mark, mashallah. I think they have, right? I think they have, and I think history bears witness to it. And we can see how well Jews were treated in the, you know, the Ottoman Caliphate, for example, how they were welcomed, they were treated, they were embraced, incorporated, right, into the whole society. And even Jewish rabbis were, you know, writing, tell everyone, come and live in the Ottoman Empire. These are lands of freedom for us, right? Even in Muslim Spain was the golden age. The great Jewish scholar Maimonides was writing in Islamic Spain. And it was just considered the golden age of a golden age for Jewish theological and intellectual development. Right. So I think that, I'm not just saying this in terms of the Jews, but I think the point is that we you know, I like I said, I just want to finish by saying that I did see this clip. I don't know if anyone's seen it, of these of a Jewish woman, just what's happening now, that she was you know, super distressed with her two children, and the person was saying, you know, don't worry, calm down, we're not going to do to treat you the way that we've been treated, you know, we're better than that. So you know, that inshallah, I hope that when the victory comes, that will come for sure, against all tyranny and oppression, it will end. But I hope that we're ready to, you know, the Muslims are ready to step up to the mark and show justice, and not to do what the very things that you are complaining about that were done to you.
Abdurraheem, I think what you made some really good points there, and that last point I'll touch upon. Yeah, I saw that video clip of the petrified Israeli woman, Jewish woman with her children, and the Hamas individuals, Palestinians, saying to her, "Don't be afraid."
We don't know if they were Hamas. We don't know who they were.
Well, whoever they were, but we're assuming that, I would say, from assumption. But yeah, they were saying to her not to worry or anything like that. And from that perspective, they would know what fear looks like, because they see women in Palestine facing that almost daily. But moving back to what you were saying about oppression and
but it
nature,
takes, you know, it takes, sorry, I've got to say, bro, it takes some special level not to take revenge, not to behave like your, you know, your first instinct is, your first instinct is, you did this to me and I'm gonna, you know, this is what you did to my kids, now watch me do it to yours.
Right. And that's why, again, coming back to what you mentioned about the Geneva Convention, the fact they had to put a convention in to say you can't do this, rape and killing and all of this in revenge. But we have ethics in Islam from the outset that this cannot be done. Revenge and retaliation in that way can be done. But I want to come back to some of the points that you mentioned, which I think were really, really important, in that, as you said, the human condition under oppression. Okay. And we've seen that when we see the oppression and what was done with Black Africans and their descendants, when we look at that 400 years and a child is born into slavery and they are mated according to animalistic tendencies because they want to secure their commodity in that particular regard. But then we saw, and I want to make this clear because some say, oh, it was Abraham Lincoln, Emancipation Proclamation, white Europeans, the Enlightenment saw that enslaving other humans was wrong. No, that was a byproduct, and that did have some momentum. And you had Frederick Douglass and others touring and speaking about the condition of slavery, the barbarity of it, and how can humans do that. But what we saw were people like Nat Turner revolting. We saw the Haiti Revolution. And the Haiti Revolution, the first land to become free from slavery in defeating the French, a mighty army, okay? But what happened? They were then subsequently punished by the French and other European powers that they, in order to maintain that freedom and be accepted with that freedom, that they had to pay a price, which took them over 100 years to pay. 136 years, 150 years. So when people look at Haiti and go, well, look at them, they're free slaves. They were crippled from the outset. And let's go now across to Africa. Let's go look at the West Indies as well. When they got their independence, the colonial infrastructure was pulled away from them, that generationally, they had no structure upon which to rely to build. So they reverted back to portents or aspects, if you like, remnants of colonialism, and not forgetting, that those colonial powers left puppets in power, like we see what's happened recently with France and Niger, right up until recently. So the point is now those tentacles reach really, really deeply. But when you've got outside superpowers like the British, who helped with the formation of Israel, America stepping in afterwards, the collective punishment where that emanated from, there is going to be a rebellion. If we look on a smaller scale, microcosmic scale, the woman who's been the wife, you've mentioned something which is really important, and I've been dealing with advising some abroad and here recently. The wife who's been oppressed, Muslim or non-Muslim, oppressed, beaten, brutalized, psychologically traumatized, there will be a point where she snaps. And the response from her snapping, if it's not escaping and getting home, might be escaping from the home, may be a very violent one. We've seen individuals killing their husbands, and I'm not advocating that for any sister or woman who's going through that, but killing her husband in fear of or having enough of that violence of the mind, of the body, of the soul. And they've walked free from court because when the circumstances have become clear, that individual was oppressed reprehensibly for years, and they just snap. Happens to some husbands as well who've been in that. So what you're saying there is very, very key. So I think that when we look at South Africa and what took place there, when we look at some of the examples that I've given with regards to emancipation of Black people, we have to look at what were those triggers that finally said enough was enough. And we have to ask ourselves in the contemporary age, when we're looking at these things here now, is it time that those who are supporting oppressive regimes start looking at triggers to say, let's look back historically. We need to start looking at this more seriously. We need to start addressing this more seriously, because this is not going to go away. The rights and the wrongs of it, the two wrongs not making a right, it's not going away. And what's happening? We're seeing generations growing into this oppression and becoming more militant, not subdued as they tried with slavery, more militant, more responsive. You can't grow up with a people that is in your that are living within your vicinity, and those people have rank hatred in their hearts because they're living a subjugated, pitiful life because of the circumstances that have been imposed.
Do you think that? How do you think that links to that recent survey that was done? Did we talk about this? Did we talk about this on when we were chatting in our group, or did we actually talk about this in our last podcast? The survey that was done where they found that quite a large percentage of Black Britons didn't feel any sense of loyalty to Britain at all, and quite the opposite. They felt.
I don't think we did speak about. We haven't.
Yeah, because I thought that was really interesting. I thought that would be a brilliant topic for us to discuss, which sort of comes off the back of this.
Yes.
That survey it just shows that there's a lot of people in this country, and they said it should be a wake up call. If
the few are going to continue to be accommodated, the few who look like you and come back from your background, if they're going to continue to be accommodated, we see that the system is geared towards whiteness. We see that the medical healthcare and the prescriptions and how their diagnosis is from a Eurocentric white point of view. So they may say have made and designed medicines for you, Abdurraheem, but when I come and say I've got the same symptoms or whatever, they will say physiologically, yeah, you have this white medicine. But genomics now, and we're not talking eugenics, we're talking genomics, there are variations in some aspects with regard to our conditions.
But do you think
they're not being accommodated for? Let me finish.
Yeah, but do you think that's what it's about, or do you think it's just something much more even overt than that?
Okay,
a much more overt level of racism. I mean, or they just feel that, I don't know, Britain is just moving towards a more, is just expressing itself more and more in terms of whiteness.
No, I think,
and you had David Cameron. David Cameron, he started the ball rolling with his whole, ironically, speech in Germany, of all places, multiculturalism is dead. Do you remember that?
I do. David Cameron. We've got Suella Braverman, who's Asian, saying the same thing. Multiculturalism's dead. Suella Braverman, brown, Home Secretary, got a brown Prime Minister. Okay, and you're saying multiculturalism is dead? Really? She must be smoking some blunts or something she's smoking, because you look in the mirror and you're talking about multiculturalism is dead. So what I'm saying, Abdurraheem,
but I think what you could argue. Let
me make this point.
Yeah.
When you look at, as I said, I've talked about healthcare. Octavia says Cruella Braverman. I rather say Suella Deville. Remember Suella Deville, 101 Dalmatians? That's how I see her. But the point is, when you look at how everything's geared, it is towards whiteness. It's been something that's foundational. It's in the infrastructure of the Rahim. But it was built upon, when you look at the experiments that will be taking place in America, Black bodies being experimented on, Native Americans being experimented on, in Asia, the same thing. So it's on private parts, and then, like for example, in the UK and America, experimenting without anesthesia, without anesthetic, on Black bodies, female bodies, and then adjusting the dose for the white fair ladies, because they realized that the pain and the barbarism of the things they were going to be doing with regards to their private parts, with regards to internal organs, would be the white body was too fragile for it, but the Black body could cope with it. Come on. And this is some of the medicine we're looking at today has emanated from that perspective. So, for example, Abdurraheem, none of us thought anything. I'm talking about as a Black man. When we used to have a cut and we'd go and buy plasters, and we'd have this pink strip on our arm. And some of us psychologically thought, oh, that's just the color of plasters, until they brought the plasters that matched skin tones. And I saw an individual wearing that plaster for the first time. There was an advert and he was crying, and I asked him why he's crying. He said, now I feel recognized, now I'm visible. But imagine, I used to walk around with nice pink plasters that I had cut for my body, that didn't match my skin type. This is how basic it's been ingrained in the psyche of the society and the system that we're in, that the perspective is white, Abdurraheem. So I'm saying from South Africa to Palestine.
So, bro, but most people in the country are white.
Okay, that's fine.
Most people are white.
Okay.
I mean, that's just the way it is. Like,
no, because if we're saying we're multicultural, and remember,
but they're not. They're saying we're not multicultural. And which what I want to go back to.
And the point that I want to
go back
I want to say one thing.
Yeah.
In you saying that most of the people here are white, I agree with you, but let's not forget this. We're here because you went over there.
No, you're basically here because we needed cheap labor after the war, basically.
That's a good point. Yeah, but
yeah, we needed cheap labor after the war, so we bought a load of people from Jamaica and from Bangladesh and Pakistan, brought them over to work in factories because there were a lot of white people were dead from fighting
to rebuild
wars.
The country, the NHS to
rebuild the country. Yeah. So I mean, I think, but that's the interesting thing is that I think for me, that's the interesting thing. It's like, it's the old Malcolm X chickens coming home to roost. Yeah, literally, it's the chickens coming home to roost. And it's, and I think that's what's interesting is that, I know certainly from the Pakistani Indian community, having lived amongst that community, and that's what I'm more familiar with than anything else, is that there is a very strong theme that you came to India, you pillaged our lands, now we're coming to England and we're going to milk the cow and we're going to take everything we can. And I think that's why a lot of Indians are chuckling about Rishi Sunak, because these people don't care. They're just pillaging the country. And so the point I want to make is that I don't think, at least today, the thing about multiculturalism is that there's nothing multicultural about Rishi Sunak or Suella Braverman. Yeah, there's nothing multicultural about them at all. Yeah,
you mean their policies?
They are a member of the elite. Yeah,
yes.
And for the elite, the only really important thing is, above everything else, money and your access to money and how well and how ready you are to serve the interests of that moneyed elite. And as long as you're ready to do that, and as long as you're ready to play the game, they don't care what color you are. They don't care if you're black, if you're white, you're brown, if you're green, they don't care, right? Their fundamental thing that they can care about is power and control, right?
That's a good
point.
So
I think this is what's really interesting is the Conservative Party seems way more willing to embrace people of different color and there's more women, more people of color in their cabinet, because they share one very, very clear goal, and it's all about getting rich and money and power, right?
Would you say that's also post-colonialism as well? Because they the Shaiwalas and you used to have Sam.
No, I don't. I think it's a bit more nuanced than that. I think there was a time. I think there was a definite. So if you look at the early stages of the East India Company, and so they were intermarried. So they went to India, they intermarried, they married the daughters of Maharajas. They intermarried they dressed like Indians. Yeah, they were there to trade. They made lots of money. But then when the Raj took over, so when it became the Raj, and when the East India Company, you could say more or less, became nationalized and got taken over by the crown, then with this, gradually, bit by bit, came this racial, religious, Christian evangelical, plus as well this racial dimension that sort of changed the nature of it.
Right.
So, and then I think that you look at if you look at the British Empire, then there was this whole racial. I mean, it's very interesting. I keep telling everyone to listen to the Empire podcast. Is so fascinating because they were talking about exactly this. Like, weren't British people shocked about what was happening in Jamaica on the plantations, right? And it seems that genuinely most of them didn't know. They had no idea.
Right.
And when they began to find out, they just were actually quite shocked and a bit disgusted. And they were talking about this book that became a huge bestseller, which was a driving force behind the whole, the whole anti-slavery movement. I mean, I don't know, we all, there's a classic term, isn't it? Whitewashing. Exactly. We like to whitewash anything. We all want to paint ourselves out as, we're not as bad and brutal as we think. I have for me, I don't care. I'll call us, I'll call whatever it is, like if we were a bunch of, we did this and that, we should be honest about it. I can't stand it. I can't stand hiding the truth. I can't stand making excuses where no excuses should be made. We should be absolutely clear and brutally clear about stuff. And if there was horrible stuff, and that goes for everybody.
That's right.
That goes both ways, by the way.
Yeah.
So in Black history, you should study great things about Black history, but you should also study the fact that, well, there were Black rulers who were involved in the slave trade, and they were the ones who were selling other Black people to the white people as slaves, and quite happily doing it and making huge amount of money out of it. Okay. So there was that as well, right? It doesn't excuse anyone, and it doesn't excuse the slave trade.
As I said earlier, truth, even if the truth in some instances is against us from the position that we're standing in, we've got to acknowledge it. We're not all right all the time. I feel what you're saying is spot on in that respect, and that's why I think. I mean,
I studied history in university, Abdul, and one of the big reasons I gave it up is I just couldn't relate to it. I just thought all of this, all I'm studying is white European supremacy. It's like it wasn't history to me. It wasn't history. It wasn't the story of humanity. It was a very, very perverted. I just got so fed up of it. It's Eurocentric. It wasn't really history to me. It was this Eurocentric, quite perverse Eurocentric view of the world that I personally thought was really just sick, right? What business has that got being taught in an academic institution? Like, it just insults the concept of academia. And so rather than having a month of Black history to come full circle to where we started, rather than having a month of Black history, what we need is we need history to be taught as history. We need to teach history as the history of the human race, with all our follies, with all our, good points and our bad points, right? And it's there amongst everybody, but we should not be whitewashing stuff. We should not be glossing over it because we feel embarrassed about what we've done. We need to confront it head on, because what's the value of studying history is hopefully so you can do something to avoid repeating the same mistakes and doing the same things. And it should be something that elevates us and hopefully, which is, by the way, I have to mention, sort of is one of the big disappointing things I found about the Empire podcast with my ex-classmate. We went to school together, William Dalrymple, is their real failure to tackle the present Hinduvar government in India, and talk about whitewashing, and just really glossing over how absolutely awful that government is, and how horrific the Hinduvar and full-on fascist they are, and they're heading for a genocide of Muslims there in India, right? So there is a bit of that as well. I just think it's sort of me. It's ironic that I'm listening to a podcast where they're talking about all these horrible things in history, and didn't they know that this was happening? At the same time, while all these horrible things are going on in India, they're doing exactly the same thing. It's like, wait a minute, Dalrymple, don't you know what's going on in India? And yet you had a whole podcast and you just couldn't deal with it, and you couldn't call Modi and his government out for what they really are. It's just, just keeps on repeating itself, bro.
That I think that selectivity is there in a number of areas that you've answered and elaborated upon. And again, when we see, I think I call it brownwashing, some of what you've described. When we see from Islamic history now, again, blackness is marginalized. Again, yet the first Islamic state yes, was in Abyssinia. Okay,
True.
the first head of state as well was in Abyssinia. Okay, the Negus. But when we look at that, when we look at the milk mother of the Prophet ﷺ, what was her ethnicity? One of his wives. Yeah. All of this we see that no, Islam, yes, the language, the vernacular was Arabic. We know that, mashallah, Allah builds in the Quran. But when we're looking that we hear about Salman al-Farsi, who was...
Bro, even deeper than that, I've got to interrupt you. Even deeper than that, where's Haqq from?
Exactly. The first city, but no, you're right.
So, where is Haqq from? Haqq is Egyptian. She is African.
Yes, but you know, and Abdurraheem, you want to know something even more profound than that?
Yeah.
Makkah was established by a black woman.
Oh, you mean what? Haqq?
Yeah. Makkah was established by a black woman. The seer is there. You know you can't deny that. She was there. Allah decreed she be there. And the tribe of Abdurraheem came and asked for permission to settle there.
She was African. I don't know.
Yes, she was African. She was black.
I mean, Egyptians are sort of...
They were black. They were black. If you want,
I mean, if you look on the tombs, I've seen a lot of tombs in Egypt. Believe me, they're sort of...
right. So okay, but they weren't European.
They're
weren't
not white. They're definitely not white.
Cleopatra,
they're definitely curly haired,
blonde with brown hair, green eyes.
They all look like me.
Exactly. So this is the point, Abdurraheem. So
honestly,
we see that amongst ethnicities. Okay.
Yeah.
Even if we're seeing it amongst Africans and they're trying to blacken up individuals that maybe didn't come from that region. We've got to stop the cognitive bias. I think what you've said is a really good conclusion, that instead of this history, that history needs to be taught from all its perspectives properly.
Yeah. Raw and just looking at it in the mirror, looking it in the face for what it is.
Absolutely. It's been a brilliant session.
Yeah, it's been great.
Next week, we're going to be back with something else which is close to you. I know that you feel passionate about, and looking forward to that. We're not going to let on what that is for today. But
inshallah. Well, we already gave a preview, didn't we? So
we did. But not everyone's seen it, so we're waiting.
Inshallah. Until
today
next week.
I think important to talk about something that's pertinent during this month, during what's happening today, and to try and put an altogether comprehensive context without cognitive bias on that, on being nuanced in how we're looking at things and being where the truth is, wherever that may be. So absolutely, for our viewers, thank you, and jazakallah khair, jazakumullah khairah for your input. Look forward to seeing you again next week. Abdurraheem, always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure, Abdul. It's been a very interesting one. Jazakallah khair, and we'll look forward to next week.
Inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.